Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Educator Yarns. I'm Jess and I'm here with Belinda Huntress from Freshwater Education.
Hi guys.
And this episode and the next 5 episodes, we're going to be talking about the early years learning framework and the new principal Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and how infused cultural perspectives are throughout the 5 outcomes. So we're really looking forward to these next few sessions that we'll be spending together yarning to you about those changes and updates. But before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to acknowledge country and the traditional owners of the land on which we are based on today. So both Belinda and I are on Darkinjung country on the New South Wales Central Coast, and we are both freezing and slightly sick because the cool change has come, which I love, but also hate a little bit. But anyway, it's lovely here on Darkinjung country today. So we've been spending time outside, flying kites over the weekend with my daughter Shirley. I like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander listeners that are tuning in. So let's jump into today's episode. I just wanted to start off by talking about our general feelings about the updates to the early years learning framework. I was super excited to see that there was a principal Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. I think it was long overdue, very much needed. Aboriginal perspectives were not mentioned, not nearly enough, barely at all in the original early years learning framework. And to see in each of the outcomes how that could be demonstrated with children and with educators throughout, I think was also really great. So those were my initial feelings, but then quite quickly I started to feel a little bit anxious and overwhelmed by it all just because of the sheer volume of it. What about you, Belinda?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, do you remember this guy years ago on some kind of infomercial TV, and his name is Big Kev, and he used to go,
Yeah.
I'm excited. Do you remember that?
Yeah, wasn't it from the footy show?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, anyway,
I don't know where
yeah.
I'm pulling that from. But anyway, initially I had those same kind of thoughts that I was like super excited, long overdue, absolutely what you said, Jess. And the fact that it is embedded throughout the entire version too, I thought that was amazing, and just, really, I guess, like taking focus of where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and histories and cultures like should be at front and center. And I guess because I've been doing a lot of mentoring lately with early childhood educators in different services, and I guess one thing I'm really picking up on in delving further into that is just how ill-equipped some educators are with, knowing how to tackle the sheer volume of how much Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander content there is without being upskilled in that space. Is that where you kind of think?
Yeah. And also I would just hate to be a Cert 3 at the moment. I feel so sorry if like there are students out there that are listening to this, just because like when I did my Cert 3, there was no early years learning framework at all. That came in, I think, when I was doing my teaching, maybe, my teaching, maybe even after that. I can't remember now. Yeah, I feel old. But there was no framework. But then even still, when I went on to teach at TAFE, and we were using the early years learning framework when I was teaching at TAFE. And that was hard enough. I remember that everyone was like, what's pedagogy? It was like, and I still like, if I tell people all the time, if I talk to Dad about pedagogy, he thinks I'm talking about a Pokemon or something. So it's like, anyway, but I look at what early childhood educators today as, just entering our profession have to get their head around. And it's massive. It's just massive. Yeah. And there's not the same supports. Like when the original early years learning framework came out, that was when we saw a huge investment into our profession of professional development funding. Like services around the country were getting, $20,000, $40,000 to invest in upskilling their team, to support it, to embed the practice, to get their head around it. That hasn't happened this time around. So not only are they trying to get their head around it, but they're trying to do it without the support and without the resources. They weren't even going to print the thing So people could have a hard copy in services, and to get it printed, like I printed mine off, was like $60 at Officeworks. So that also wasn't great. And the other thing that they had when the original one came out was that practice guide, the accompanying document that showed how to put it, examples of how to put it into practice. And that's not there this time either. So I feel like we've really lifted the bar on what quality looks like right across, including cultural perspectives. However, with that lift, there doesn't seem to be the supports that are already exhausted, burnt out profession is desperately in need of. So that's the concern, is that how well is it actually going to, I think it's still early days, like it's only April. We only had to start working with this in February officially. So it's still quite early days, but I feel like it's a nerve-wracking time for educators who are trying to grapple it and get their head around it.
And so what's I'm interested to know about whether, the EYLF has had, do they have like an Aboriginal advisory group or a group that's guiding them on those massive changes that have been put in? Do we know that?
No, yeah, I know that they did consultation. That was quite thorough, like consultation, and that took place. I don't think it's not and it like a standard like fixed advisory group. I should say it's not that. But I know that there was consultation that took place. But I suppose they were just looking at what quality is, and they've definitely captured that well. The quality as well. But it's not necessarily their role to then look at the Labor government and say, hey, you actually need to fund the implementation of this quality that you're pushing for, as well as attracting more people to our profession and improving our working conditions by raising our pay and, like all of those things. Like, I mean, because it's all interrelated and interconnected. So I don't think that there was anyone that was looking holistically about how all those bits were going to come together. They were just focused on putting quality in and those cultural perspectives in, and they've done that really well, in my opinion. They've done that really well. How that will now look in practice, I think, is what is going to be seen. So I guess that's why I was really keen to do these episodes, because there is not that funding yet available. There is not those resources that have been compiled yet. So this is a free resource that we can put out there for educators in the profession to at least get some initial ideas and thoughts from us on where do they start with this. You're happy to start kicking off looking at outcome one. I thought, like, each episode we'll just focus on each of the outcomes, right? So outcome one, children have a strong sense of identity, and the four sub areas are: children feel safe, secure and supported; children develop their emerging autonomy, interdependence, resilience and agency; children develop knowledgeable, confident self-identities and a positive sense of self-worth; and children learn to interact in relation to others with care, empathy and respect. So when I was looking at children feel safe, secure and supported, I literally just went through and I started highlighting, where is the mention of cultural perspectives and Aboriginal perspectives and so forth. And obviously we're not going to be able to go through each and every one of these, because each and every one of these subpoints could also be its own episode. And we all know that we try and bite off more than we can chew. But if I look at children feel safe, secure and supported, the first little point there says this is evident when children, for example, share ideas and information about their culture and cultural artifacts. And I thought that's a really easy one to start having yarn about, what's out there and what educators can do. What are your thoughts for that, Belinda? What have you seen going around?
So I certainly think, I've been doing a fair bit of work on this particular point, actually, in mentoring educators at the moment around cultural responsiveness. And I know that the language has changed within the EYLF, moving from cultural competence, cultural awareness, to cultural responsiveness. And I think that really talks about, like, in terms of this particular dot point within outcome one, I think that that's really what that's talking about, is being culturally responsive to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. And I know we've talked about this in depth already, but having those relationships with families so that you've built that connection, so that cultural information can come through, so that you're then incorporating that child's unique Aboriginal cultural identity into their education.
Yeah.
You know, I did up a case study about my son, and we were going through some of the, you know, about some cultural information about it, and we were going through with ideas, you know, like the fact that, you know, where even though I'm freshwater, their father's saltwater, and that's a really that's probably their main, you know, they've grown up on the beach, we go for pippies, all that sort of stuff. And then from that, I kind of asked educators to come up with some ideas around, well, how could you embed these things into, you know, into the day-to-day life of that child. And so I think that cultural responsiveness is a really important way of doing that. But I think just to get to that point, have you seen there's a tool at Sol, I don't know if I'm saying this right.
Yeah. The self-reflection tools, that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and the
It's good.
cultural responsive and the cultural continuum framework. So it's asking educators to examine, and it gives you, like, it's really in depth, and it gives you, I guess, like different factors that tell you where you're at, and where your service might be at on this continuum for cultural responsiveness.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great tool to firstly look within yourself. I think a lot of this really comes to do with, even though we're saying it's providing opportunities for children, we can't do that until we look within our own selves and have that understanding of what cultural responsiveness is. So I think educators really need some professional development around how to do that, to be able to get to doing that effectively and appropriately. I've probably went on a little bit of a tangent in terms of that, Jess, but I think personally for that one, it's really about building relationships with families so that you can have the ideas and understanding about that child's unique background. What do you think?
Yeah, so what you're talking about, I think we covered a lot in episode 3 when we yarned about cultural learning plans, and some of those tables, like how to work in partnership with families and so forth. So yes to all of that, because we want to encourage children to share their individual culture and what culture means for me, to you, to your children, to your husband. It's all very different, and it's a personal thing, and we talked about how that has been shaped by where we live, our personal relationships, experiences, our education, our connections with community and country, and all of those things. So it's an individual thing. So understanding those families and their children and their individual cultural context is really important in this. As well as, you know, professional development. And that can be having mentoring. It can be, you know, doing some workshops, listening to this podcast. Those are all forms of professional development, but also having a range of resources that you can call upon, that you can be learning alongside children as you're going through this process. So one of the resources that I just grabbed off the shelf before we started is Yarn About series, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Weapons and Tools. So this is just a really great non-fiction book that educators could use in the classroom alongside children to use as a reference book to dip in and out of and learn about some of our cultural artefacts and tools. Wingaru Education, we stocked this little card pack from them, which is First Nations Tools research cards. This is good for preschoolers and probably children in a primary setting. But let me try if I can get someone out. So this one is just on an axe head that I've pulled out. So it has these sort of provoking questions. What was I used for? What was I made from? How was I made? Who used me? And where was I used? So, you know, to pull those out and to have those conversations and use them intentionally at group time, or to set up an interest area or discovery area, to go and purchase some cultural artifacts that you can use functionally in your environment. So have coolamons to hold your Lego blocks, have digging sticks in the sand pit to do mark making with. So when you have these cultural artifacts and resources, children can see them reflected in their environment around them. It's normal. And for non-Indigenous children that potentially aren't familiar with them, they have the opportunity to then ask questions and educators to intentionally teach them about those tools and resources.
And I love that idea, Jess, about having coolamans, with Lego, for instance. It doesn't, it also brings to the light, I guess, that these things they don't have to be set in their own spot. They can be integrated. They can be they are multi-purpose, these kinds of artifacts anyway. All of our artifacts are pretty much multi-purpose. And I think it just does that really good balance between contemporary and traditional, and that we're still using these things for lots of different reasons, and that can work together. I think that's important as well.
Yeah. Another point it had here was access resources that support cultural diversity, family structures, and gender identities. So I know that we talked about this a little bit in episode 3 as well. And I think in our the last one that we did, our curriculum episode, where we talked about also auditing resources that you have in your environment, that you have available to you. So having a look to see, well, with the Aboriginal resources that you do have, are they reflective of contemporary and traditional culture, urban and regional settings, ones that have language, ones that don't? Like who's being reflected in them? Do you have books that have diverse family structures, children being raised by grandparents, extended family, kinship, that have diverse gender identities and mixed families and same-sex couples and all that sort of stuff? So I think that also could lend itself into a curriculum audit that you would have at your service. And we have a resource audit that's part of our programming and planning guide, just as a starting point for educators to look at, to check some of those things off. But I would be looking at some of these points and then going and looking at your resources and identifying 100%. What you have a lot of and what are the gaps. Where are some areas that you need to improve upon?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Jess. And I think on that, particularly, I don't really think there's a very good, like a general understanding of the way that Aboriginal kinship works as well. So I think certainly like looking at books and resources that are around that particular thing, a lot of our people are still living within a traditional kinship structure. And I know even like for our kids, not in my family, but again on their father's side of the family, they have they're still abiding by a traditional kinship structure. And so what that means is that our kids have like 100 nans and pops, for instance, and they know how to relate to each of those people by the way that they refer. When they're meeting with the old people, like, their nans, brothers and sisters and cousins, then those older people call our kids pop. So the children know, like they refer to the children as pop. So then they have, like 100 grandparents essentially in a kinship system. So I think even, I've made some of my wooden peg dolls that I've made. They come in families where you've got brothers and sisters that are, brother, sister, cousins. You've got grandparents. You've been, like you said, you're being raised by grandparents and extended family. So I think those kind of things are out there, but it's about having that awareness of that's how a lot of our people are still living too.
Yeah. And I think there's a really great video. I'm sure it's from the Healing Foundation, but I'll have to check and I'll put the link in the show notes. So it's a really short video that explains what kinship is. Because if educators aren't aware of what a kinship system looks like, just watching that short animation in a staff meeting can help you sort of get your head around it, that there are many mums and dads and aunties and uncles and nans and pops, and they're not all even necessarily biologically related to you. So, and then the responsibilities that you then have for children that aren't biologically yours, and that sort of shared responsibility. So, which is quite interesting. So very valid point. And I know at the moment my daughter's preschool, they're looking at houses and who lives in your house and all that sort of thing. And so my mum pretty much lives with us all the time, and so to think about, it's not just mum and a dad and brothers and sisters and your immediate family, but, we all know that often we have extended periods of time where our extended families are living with us on and off, and, cousins and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, good. Okay, so we've sort of said that children feel safe, secure and supported, and this is evident, for example, when educators provide opportunities to invite Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander educators to provide feedback and reflections on assisting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to feel safe, secure and supported. I know that you've done some work around this, Belinda, with centres that you've mentored and really supporting Aboriginal educators to have a voice and giving feedback onto the curriculum. But what is a way that you can do that without making those educators feel like they are responsible for doing all of the work? Because I feel like there's a fine line here that we want them to have that voice, the opportunity to give feedback, but also not to put responsibility or assume knowledge, or that this is their job because they're Aboriginal, so they feel they should be doing these things. So how do you navigate that?
it is such a tricky one because I mean, we know about this, the whole there's such a burnout factor happening there with preparing for NAIDOC week or reconciliation week. It's like, well, let's ask the Aboriginal educator, which is great. Like, we want to make sure, like you're saying, that we're including those voices, and we're kind of ensuring that that's what is happening and that's like authentic. I guess for me, what I have found, now I don't know if this is practical for everyone, but I certainly think this would be what I would consider to be best practice. I believe that having mentoring from someone not connected to the service is super empowering for this to take place, because when you're talking about Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander educators, often, like, this is a bit of a cultural communication thing too. A lot of our mob will like agree to something, but they don't really want to agree to something, is the other thing. And often when you put like on the spot and you don't know how to react and you haven't had time to think, and that's another cultural thing, is this active listening and taking time to form your response and really reflecting on it, and maybe needing to talk to community or your elders about what that means. So I think for me, the most powerful work that I've done in this space with educators is developing a relationship with Aboriginal educators and forming this relationship, this trusting and reciprocal relationship, where the educators feel comfortable in knowing that what they say to me is respected and is, in a sense, confidential, but having me as an advocate to be able to then pass on information to the service. So, I know recently I was working with a service in a city in Sydney, and one of the educators mentioned to me, Aboriginal educators, that she wanted to have a more active role in being able to have some say over what's happening with Aboriginal programming and embedding Aboriginal perspectives. And I guess having that really honest conversation with her, and she kind of expressed that she didn't quite feel comfortable going to the director to talk. They had a great relationship, but in terms of this, it was something that she felt more comfortable talking to me about. Then I was able to advocate for that for the service. And that really turned into an amazing opportunity, because then this educator has actually been allocated a set amount of time each week dedicated to Aboriginal programming and what they're doing in that space. I guess on the other hand, in another service that I worked at last year, there was some lateral violence. Oh, I don't know what the right word is. Some non-Indigenous director making some quite derogatory comments to the Aboriginal educator about her not looking Aboriginal and her not being Aboriginal and all sorts of things like this. And then she was quite open with me about how that made her feel and about, what that meant. And then I had to have some really honest conversations with the service about how to kind of, like giving them some cultural awareness about what they need to do about that, and just general cultural awareness. So I think from my experience, having a mentor who's not connected, I know some early childhood organizations do have, like Aboriginal HR, for instance, or whoever, like mentors within their service. So I think that's great. Or even externally, if you can get onto someone like, like what I'm doing at Freshwater Education. I don't know if Jess, are you doing stuff like that as well?
Yeah, we do. And we've done it for a long time, particularly with mainstream organisations and early learning services, where potentially there's just one Indigenous educator and that person isn't connected to other First Nation educators in other services within the same franchise or company or whatever. So there's a lot of instances like that where they're sort of a bit isolated and standalone, and they really need that support. We also run something that's called a yarning circle. It used to be face-to-face, but now we do it virtually, and you're one of our speakers in our upcoming yarning circle, which is great, one of our guest speakers. And we find that we do get a lot of Indigenous educators that are in those positions that come to those yarning circles because they want the connection with other educators, for that support. So making sure, I know that we encourage educators and early learning services to look at their recruitment processes and practices, and to try and encourage the employment, or to have an identified position within their organisation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to apply for. But we need to make sure that your service is culturally safe first for that person to be coming and working within your place, and also that they are supported once they're there. So whether that's through a mentor or you've got HR or whatever it may be, but I think having that and someone that can advocate for them and can be a sounding board is really important. So yeah, I think that's great that you're able to provide that service and have such great results as well come from that, to empower that person to have a voice. So that's great. Another way that we can see that it's evident that children feel safe, secure and supported is when educators display both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags at the setting and discuss their importance for all Australians. So obviously we know that we can fly the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags, and I probably get emails all the time from educators asking me, well, what comes first and what order do they have to fly in? And Narragansett has a really good guide that you can access on the protocols for having flags at your service, which I encourage everyone to go to. And they also have everything you need to know about the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag and so forth. But a great resource that we have on our website is this flag poster, which just talks about the symbolism of both the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag, the colours and what everything represents within it, and a little bit of the history of those flags. So a lot of services display this and talk to children about the significance of the flags and that there are 3 flags in Australia. And I know Magabala Books, they're releasing it. I don't know when exactly. The release date is here, May 1st. It's a new book, Our Flag, Our Story, the Torres Strait Islander flag by Bernard Namok Jr. and Thomas Mayo. And it's been illustrated by Tori J. Morty. So that's coming out too. So I think that'll be a really great book to be able to talk to children about the Torres Strait Islander flag and also Torres Strait Islander culture, because look, we're both Aboriginal early childhood consultants. I don't know about you. I don't really do a lot of work around Torres Strait Islander perspectives. It's not my culture. I've not been to the Torres Strait Islands. Whilst I have friends and connections with community and so forth, I don't really feel like it's my place to speak on those things. So I too look for resources and tools and that I can bring in that cultural perspectives in programs that I'm working within. So really being mindful that, to be on the lookout for Torres Strait Islander specific resources. And I think this one at Magabala Books is going to be really well received.
Sounds amazing.
Another one was for educators to enable children to see their culture in the environment. So Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander art from the local region, cultural events that are significant in the child's life. So I think that comes back again to knowing your families, having those cultural learning plans, and potentially, the resource audit, finding the gaps, making culture visible within the service, which we talked about in episode 3. So go back and have a look at that episode, checking out databases like the Supply Nation database to see what artists and so forth are in your community that you can be accessing and buying and procuring your resources from. And I don't know about you, but I always go to the black markets, which are down in Sydney, and the Indigenous Art Fair that's about to take off down there. So also thinking about local markets that could be around your place that are First Nations run and led, that you can go and meet the creators and the makers directly and hear their story. And I think it's always best to buy directly from community where you
100%.
can.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a situation this week. It was a great conversation, but it was a bit of a situation. It was a company that I subscribed to their emails. They sent me an email saying that they're working with this Aboriginal artist who is part of the Indigenous Arts Code and so forth, and listed their products and so forth. And I said, well, I wrote back and I said, well, are you a part of the Indigenous Art Code? Because them being a part of it has nothing to do with you as a non-Indigenous business that's selling their stuff. And they said, no, we print resources or make resources for these artists and so forth. And I said, well, no, you don't. You engage them to make art for you, which you sell and you pay them a fee for, which is different. So if I was looking at developing a resource, I would engage, a woodcutter or a printer or a sewer or something like that to potentially create the resources for me. I would design it, they would create it, then I would sell it. That's different to somebody that's contracting an artist to develop resources for them, for their business, which they are selling. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to question statements that people are making. And I said, there's nothing wrong with with that. There's nothing wrong with you contracting an Aboriginal artist to make a resource for you, which you are then going to sell. But you need to be transparent, because them being part of the Indigenous Art Association or the Indigenous Arts Code has nothing to do with you. What does your business do to make sure that that artist is being treated equitably and fairly and being protected, and their cultural copyright and so forth, you know? And so making sure that the statements that you're making actually reflect that, because if you don't feel comfortable telling people that that's the arrangement, then that tells you that there's something wrong with the arrangement, you know?
Yeah,
so to just say, you know, like, yeah, we pay this fee initially and then they get monthly royalties or whatever it is, but just be transparent about it, and then consumers can make a decision as to whether or not they want to buy from your business or not, you know? And I have to say, there are some businesses that I have been wary of in the past, who I now am starting to feel a little bit differently towards. Yarn was one of them. I'll say Yarn was one. I think they had a very iffy history of when the company was sold originally, and you know, not wanting to change the name and all that sort of stuff, and not being transparent about, or not transparent enough about being non-Indigenous owned and contracting and what they were doing. They've taken on a lot of that feedback, I have to say. I have to give credit where credit's due. And their About Us page now is one of the most transparent that I've ever seen. You know, it's really great. So even though I think they didn't start off well with how they were entering that marketplace, they've taken on a lot of the feedback, and the feedback was harsh, I have to say, and they've done something about it. And I've just saw last night that in their social enterprise sort of stuff, with, I don't know what you call it, like their impact that they've had on charities and so forth, they've donated like $1.8 million or something, which is huge. That's huge, you know, to be able to give that back. So, you know, and they support like Gunawira, which is in Roselle. They support the Australian Literacy and Numeracy Foundation. Like, they're just doing some great stuff. And I know that now they're being very transparent about what their arrangements are. So it's not, I think people always get me a little bit wrong. It's not that like I'm anti non-Indigenous companies selling cultural resources, because I know that mob rely on the income that they get from that. But it's just being about transparent about who you are, what that arrangement is, and so people can make informed decisions, you know. So
I think educators are getting a lot better at asking those questions too, though. Like, I think there's a lot of awareness coming out about that now, like, who did this, like, are you paying them, or how are you protecting their intellectual property? Like, I'm hearing lots of those questions, which is great.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, being more knowledgeable and savvy about that sort of stuff, and, you know, because I think people have to understand the history of where that comes from. So it comes from people that are referred to as carpetbagging, where they used to go into remote communities, regional communities, and wait for artists to fall on dire circumstances, and sometimes not even, and they would offer them a pittance for their artwork, you know, $50, $100 or whatever, and then they would take that and they would sell it in, you know, galleries in Sydney and, you know, even internationally for thousands and thousands of dollars. And these artists were struggling to feed their families and, you know, get medical care and housing and living in these terrible conditions. And the consumer on the other end thinks that they're supporting these communities. It's got a beautiful picture of the artist and a story about the artist, and it's just completely, you know, unethical practice, which is why we have associations like the Indigenous Code and the Aboriginal Arts Association, because you know that, you know, art sellers that are a part of these codes are ethical, you know, and that they're doing the right thing, that they're not extorting people. And you know, Supply Nation is great for that reason, and why we encourage you to buy directly from Aboriginal artists, because then, you know, 100% of the proceeds are going to that artist. You know, it's not going through a middleman. So I guess that's the history of how these things started to come about and why we're doing it. Okay, so moving on, one of the other outcomes within outcome, one of the sub-outcomes is children develop their emerging autonomy, interdependence and resilience and agency. And this is evident, for example, when educators share stories with families, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and culturally linguistically diverse families, about their child's learning success. I feel like this is so important. I met with an educator just last week who has told me, like their child's neurodiverse
Yep.
and has been having some issues with the local school, and the child has had detentions, has been threatened with suspension. The child's 5. There's not enough resources in the classroom. The family is very proactive. The child's going to see a PED, an OT, a speechy, lots of resources, lots of strategies. The behaviours that are happening at school are not happening at home. The teacher sort of said it's not our responsibility. The child's not ASD, so there's no funding that can be sought for that child, has other diagnoses, and so is looking at being suspended or expelled from the school, which I think is shocking. And I just think, how does this family feel when the school rings them every day to talk to them, so I think it's really important that educators foster positive relationships with families. And this school has blatantly told this family that they need to medicate their child, which, may or may not be in the child's best interest, but that's not a decision or a recommendation that the school should be making. It should be coming from a health professional, right, in my opinion. So I think just shocking stuff like that. And I just think, for Aboriginal families that already have had negative historical experiences, intergenerational negative experiences with schooling systems, that are already feeling anxious about sending their child to a place that's outside of community, outside of their family, and when their child gets there is sort of ridiculed and ostracized and punished, at 5. How must that family feel, and what must their dispositions toward that education system be when that occurs? So I feel like there's a lot of space here for improvements and to be proactive in developing those relationships. So picking up the phone at recess or lunch and just saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know that so-and-so had a really great morning, or they were really caring towards a peer that was upset, or they did really well with a creative writing story that they wrote, or they picked up rubbish and we're really impressed with how they're going, or they're so confident, or whatever it may be, just so that family knows that you see their child, you like their child, you want them there, that you're developing those relationships and that you care. And then when something not so great happens that needs to be raised with the family, I feel like the family is way more receptive to being collaborative in finding a solution that works when there's been that groundwork and that foundation laid to develop a partnership and a relationship that's caring and supportive. So what are your thoughts?
I do a fair bit of this, actually. I know like, particularly because my predominant workplace is in a primary school, I really admire and have worked in the past with Dr. Chris Sarah, who is amazing and has done some amazing, and is still doing really amazing things with our kids and schools and around high expectations. And I think that's something that unfortunately does happen, like what you're saying, Jess, about a lot of our Aboriginal kids are, getting labelled in, for lack of a better word, like the naughty kids, or like, and so I think, and it, like, seeing it happen in schools, even though we're not supposed to do that, it does still happen. Like, teachers are still behind the scenes, like, talking like that in some regards. So I think, like, absolutely, like, any opportunity that I can. I'm usually, we do a lot of stuff at our school, and I send a lot of email, like most of our families are working families. And so I know it is, like, as a parent, and like, my child is neurodiverse, and he does struggle with some behavior and emotional regulation stuff. And I know as soon as the phone calls and it's the school, my heart just races, like, oh no, what's happened now? But so I mainly send things by email. I'll send photos and things like that. I'll look at this amazing thing that we've been doing or whatever. But I also just love to, like, using that pick up and drop off time, I think, is super important in my role of engaging with families. Like, it's just, this is what they've been up to today, or, they did great in Dig Club or whatever. Like, I think there needs to be more of that. It's not just like, okay, see you tomorrow. It has to be that level of engagement, which I think you can get so much of even in 2 minutes a day, you know. I loved at my son's previous preschool, before he went off to kindy, the director would literally, because at a preschool, it was like a designated time. I guess it's no different, but like most of the kids would come at the time between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Like that was the general time. And I'd never actually seen this before, but she would actually stand out the front and welcome every family individually in the morning and same in the afternoon. And I just thought, I said to her, like, it's made such a big difference in the relationship that I built with that service, like in the year that he was there, because every morning I had the opportunity to talk to her. And I just have never seen that. Have you seen that, Jess?
Not in the mornings, but I know my daughter's preschool, they have the same set hours, 8:30 to 4:30. So most parents, again, they drop off between 8:30 and 9, not 9:15. And then pick up between 3:30 and 4:30 is when generally they do that. So I know when I go to pick up, most of the time they finish their day outside. So the educators are outside with children, and there's one educator that's always inside who's resetting the room, getting things organized for the next day or doing the day book or whatever. And it's that person's sort of role to greet each family as they come to pick up their child and talk to the family about their child's day. And that's happened since she started there. It's the routine. So you go, you have a really nice chat, and it's just really, it's lovely to be able to talk to them, and they're accessible. They haven't got children all around them that are climbing up them. It's an opportunity for me to say anything that's happening at home that they need to be made aware of. And it's really comfortable for me because we talk every day. So in the event that, you know, something has happened, or, you know, I feel really comfortable having that conversation with them. I don't feel particularly vulnerable or confronted or challenged because I talk to them all the time. Whereas I feel that in some settings, educators aren't as accessible. And so it can feel like you're talking to them for the very first time about something that's uncomfortable for you.
And they might
that's really hard,
either, you know, like too.
Yeah. And that's really hard. So I think those relationships and trying to find time that you make yourself accessible. And then if you can't, making sure that across a month that you take the time to send a message, an email, make a phone call, and touch base with each child's family once a month. That's not about giving them an observation, just dropping you a line to let you know. And it's really appreciated. So there's been a few times that my daughter's had a rough drop off, and the educators have just texted me like off their own phones, which I also think is very lovely of them to do that. But you know, a couple of pictures of her engaging happily in play, and it's such a relief to get that and to feel like, and in the pictures there's always an educator sitting next to her. And so I know that she's being supported. That's all really important to me. And I know, you know, that they don't have any Aboriginal staff that are working at the service, but I know that she's so supported in her relationships there. So I think it's just going out of your way to build relationships with families proactively, so you don't have to be reactive whenever there's a situation that occurs.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Another one of the points that came under this with children developing emerging autonomy, interdependence, resilience and agency was to share stories of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have shown agency and resilience. And I think some of these stories can come from newspapers. So the Koori Mail is a fortnightly Aboriginal newspaper, which I tell everybody to subscribe to. So some good news, current affair stories that are coming through that I think that you could harvest and share those with children. And also one of my favourite books that are in this category is Freedom Day, and it's based on Vincent Lingari and the Wave Hill Walk-Off. And obviously it's, you know, the song that comes from this is, you know, from little things, big things grow. So a really great story about advocacy and having to overcome, you know, trials and tribulations and, you know, succeeding in doing that. So is there any story that comes to mind for you in that?
Well, I mean, this is more relevant to primary, I guess. So it's probably not so relevant, but I've, you know, recently taught a lesson about the floods of Gundagai.
Yes. Yeah.
I just think like there's so many amazing stories of resilience, even like Truganini, you know, David Unipen, like there's so many amazing change makers that have That's
Did
it.
you use
Okay.
this one? Did you use this book? So
No, I
this
just
is
like made the lesson up. No.
yeah. So this is on the floods. So Biddy Galling is Anita Heiss's first children's picture book,
Wow.
and
Okay.
she's also written the fiction book for adult. I was going to say for educators, but
Okay.
it's for everybody. And I can't remember the name. It's a very long name, so you'll have to excuse me, but it's beautiful. And I'll put the link in our notes for people and it's a great read, let me just say. And she's about to do another historical fiction book that's being released, I think, later this year in November, I'm pretty sure. I'm a huge Anita Heiss fan. Follow her on Facebook and Insta. She's just done some plays in Sydney and Brisbane on one of her books as well. So she's got some great books, but this is a great book. So and looking at Jackie and so forth that that went and rescued the people from the floods, and there's that sculpture of them in the main street that shows that historically to this day. So I think some great books that are out there. You're right. Yeah.
What about that new one, Jess? I can never remember the name of it, but it's something thinks you're deadly.
Oh, this book thinks you're deadly. By Torres. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, hang on a second.
Yeah, that's a really good one too.
For people that like, because I'm holding up books, right? So if you're listening in the car and you want to watch us in real time, you can watch us on YouTube. Where you can see like the video recording of us. I'm holding all these books up. But this book, Thinks You're Deadly, by Koori. So a celebration of Black excellence. And I heard that he's making a second edition of this. So he's got in here, there's a music category, film, television and stage, visual arts, literature. Anita Heiss is in there. Journalism, education, and I'm pretty sure Chris Sara is in there.
Okay.
Science, health and sport, which is great because quite often when you ask educators, can you name 10 famous Aboriginal people? They tell us about singers and sports stars, but to know that, there's more of us and to us than that, I think is important. And another one that you could use.
That's so funny, Jess.
Oh, is this the right one?
I mean, just in terms of, because I do like a cultural trivia as part of my teacher cultural awareness training that I do. And one of my trivia questions is name 5 prominent Indigenous people who are not sports stars.
Yes, exactly. And you have to preface this that. Sometimes I don't even take that out. They still can't name them. And I'm like, oh, come on, just look at the Rabbitohs side. Look at South Sydney. You'll be right. But you should use these. And you can do this with children. You can do this at a staff thing. So this is another Wingaru and First Nations Who Am I edition. So it just has the little prompts that you can ask. So Tasmanian, Bunurong and Yuin Heritage, a book called Dark Emu, which challenged myths about traditional lifestyles of First Nations people. Dates: born in 1947. Fact: in 2013, he was awarded the Prime Minister's Literacy Award for Young Adult Fiction. And of course, he's Bruce Pascoe. Yeah. So, thinking about, just a fun way to, at the beginning of each staff meeting, use one of those cards, read some facts, see if anyone knows them. If not, it's Bruce Pascoe. Go and listen, watch one of his documentaries, read one of his books, listen to it on Audible, follow him on socials and so forth. So I think that there's heaps of little props and provocations out there that you could look towards. I know that we haven't even really gotten that deep into outcome 1, but were there any particular dot points that stood out for you that you wanted to yarn about, Belinda?
I'm just having a quick browse, Jess.
Sorry. So I know that I just wanted to say that a lot of what's in this EYLF dovetails with the Reconciliation Action Plan episodes that we have already done. So one of them here was engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and community members to explore their own and other social and cultural heritage. So for example, in episode 1, we talked at length about community engagement. So you can go back, and that was to dovetail with the Reconciliation Action Plan, making connections with your community, right? So another one was to display positive images of themselves and families and culture and community. And we did that in episode 3, where we talked about celebrating each child and their identity and the cultural learning plans. So a lot of these, there's a lot of cross-referencing, 100%. I should say, between outcome 1 and some of the previous ones that we've done. I guess another one that sort of came out is sharing their stories about country and community in relation to children developing knowledgeable and confident self-identities and a positive sense of self-worth. I've recently been looking at this Reconciliation in Action by Early Childhood Australia. Have you got a copy of this yet, Belinda?
Yes, I actually just bought that for a school. Yeah.
So good. I have to
haven't read it
say,
yet, though.
it is a really really great text, right? And there's this little diagram that it has in here. I'm just flipping through to see if I can hold it up and show you, but essentially it's a triangle, and it talks about Aboriginal pedagogy in part, saying that the bottom of that triangle is connecting with community and connecting with country, and then in the middle it talks about story sharing and yarning in the middle, and then educators are sitting at the top. This is the diagram. Sorry, I'm just holding it up so people can see, right? And I feel like all throughout the early years learning framework, we're making constant connections between connecting with country and connecting with community. And there's a reason for that, is because for Aboriginal people, that's in essence who we are, right? It's about connecting with place, where you're from and who you belong to and our community that's around us. And so thinking about at that, I guess, beginning point for you, as a starting point for anybody that's entering this, is that the two things that I really would be focusing on is your connection with country and your connection with place, and to be mindful that you don't have to be out in the bush to be connecting with country. Anywhere that you are in Australia, you are on country, you are on Aboriginal land. So being mindful of that country and your community connections. So who is in your community? What are the roles that they play? How are you reflecting community's values, beliefs, practices, goals, and aspirations into your service philosophy, into your policies, and into your curriculum? And then understanding ways of teaching. So whether that's the 8 ways of learning or 2 ways learning, but one of the things that we have that ties across all of those different Aboriginal pedagogical frameworks is storytelling, deep listening, and yarning. So making that a part of your practices and creating space for that, whether that's having yarning circles, or doing practices like Dadiri, that deep connection to country, that mindfulness practice. So, and storytelling through art, through music, through dance, being mindful of those 3 things. So I really recommend this resource to anybody that's listening. I think there's some really great takeaways. I'm highlighting like crazy. I'm one of those people that buys books and highlights them. So I just highlight the whole book, which doesn't really help me any.
You're a lover too, aren't you, Jess?
Well, yes.
Typical teacher.
So, sorry.
We're all stationery nerds, aren't we? Highlighters and stationery and making stuff look pretty.
Yeah, we are. So everything's being highlighted at the moment. It makes me feel really productive and I don't know, effective. It's like highlight. Even though it's probably
taking extra time doing it, absolutely.
Whatever.
Whatever. But I think you're so right though. Like really, I think once you feel confident in being able to have, as much knowledge of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as you can, or as you're going or whatnot, all of this, you can see that pretty much any one of those dot points can link in with Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. It's just about being aware and looking through that lens and seeing where it fits. So I think we're going to wrap up our first episode on looking at the early years learning framework. So this is outcome 1. Next week, we'll be doing outcome 2. If people have any questions or that they want us to address that you've picked up within the early years learning framework, you can email us, drop us a DM on socials or comment on our post. We would love you to leave us a review if you've liked the episode. It makes us discoverable to more educators and to get this out there, because essentially, as we mentioned before, we're trying to create a free resource because there are no resources at the moment or funding available to get people's head around this. So hopefully you're enjoying it and taking away some good tidbits. I also have some professional development opportunities coming up on the Gold Coast
and in Canberra, where we're spending a day looking at the early years learning framework. So for people that want to know more about some in-person events that I have coming up, you can check those out on the events page at kooricurriculum.com. We also have a live webinar that we run monthly on understanding the EYLF principle, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, if you'd like to hear my thoughts about that specifically. And I know, Belinda, you are doing heaps and heaps of mentoring in this space and also doing talks at conferences and professional development days. So if your organisation has a PD day coming up that you're looking for a speaker, please keep us in mind. And if you're looking for a cultural mentor, someone to come and work with your Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander staff that you have, and you're looking for that guidance, I know, Belinda, that's right up your alley, and that you'd be really keen to have a yarn and to speak about that.
Absolutely. Reach out.
Yeah. So we will see you all again next week, and hope you've enjoyed the episode, and we'll talk more then. See ya.
Stay deadly, everyone.